Imagine the scene, a rundown hovel, thick with tension and the smell of poverty. Linda Grayson, stripped of her wealth and reeling from public humiliation after chasing a lie, finally confronts her billionaire husband, Edward, the man who orchestrated their fall from grace. "You knew, didn't you?" she shrieks, her voice raw with fury and the devastating knowledge of his manipulation. "Bradford told me, the debt. You set me up. You deliberately threw me to that wolf just to watch me squirm. Was this all part of your twisted test?" Tears of rage stream down her face as she accuses him, not just of faking bankruptcy, but of playing a cruel, calculated game with their lives, perhaps even using her suspected infidelity as justification. He meets her volcanic anger, the mask of the broken man finally cracking. This wasn't just about testing loyalty anymore, it was a reckoning steeped in accusations of deceit, betrayal, and unimaginable emotional cruelty. How did this loving wife become consumed by desperation? What dark truths pushed this powerful billionaire to orchestrate such a devastating charade? And what really happened that shocked everyone? Before we dive into the full, unbelievable story of Edward Grayson's desperate gamble and the shocking consequences for his family, make sure you like this video if you love dramatic stories, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Don't forget to ring the notification bell too. Now let's begin. The rain came down in a soft, persistent curtain against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Edward Grayson's penthouse suite. Each drop seemed to tap a mournful rhythm against the glass, a counterpoint to the oppressive silence within the sprawling apartment that felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on extravagant loneliness. Edward stood, a silhouette against the stormy cityscape, one hand resting on the cool marble ledge, the other clenching almost imperceptibly at his side. Outside, the city pulsed with life and light, a vibrant tapestry he felt utterly disconnected from. Inside, surrounded by priceless art, bespoke furniture, and the echoing emptiness that wealth often carved into a life, he felt like a ghost haunting his own existence. He was Edward Grayson, a name synonymous with success, power, and an almost mythical level of fortune built from grit and shrewd investments over decades. His portfolio spanned industries, his properties dotted the globe, his influence reached into corridors of power most men only dreamed of. Yet standing here, in the heart of his empire, the victory tasted like ash. What was the point of conquering the world if your own home felt like occupied territory? His wife, Linda. Linda. Once her eyes had held a spark that wasn't just the reflection of diamonds. Now her smiles seemed currency activated, appearing only when a new acquisition was made, a lavish trip booked, or the platinum card swiped. Her warmth had cooled, replaced by a polished veneer that felt as impenetrable as the vault holding their stocks. He found himself wondering, with a weariness that settled deep in his bones, if she ever truly saw him anymore, or just the gold-plated provider he had become. The title hinted at betrayal, a seed of doubt that festered quietly. Was her distance merely indifference, or something more? And Chloe, his daughter, a beautiful, bright girl swallowed whole by the digital vortex of status and superficiality. Her days were a performance art piece broadcast online, showcasing designer bags, exotic locales, staged moments of effortless luxury. Her connection wasn't to people, but to followers. Her validation came from likes, not love. He scrolled through her feed sometimes, a detached observer watching a stranger curate a life devoid of the substance he craved for her. Had he done this? Had his relentless pursuit of more taught his children that things were the only measure of worth? Only Lucas, his quiet, introspective son, offered a flicker of genuine connection. Lucas, who preferred books to brands. Quiet walks in the park to flashy parties. Lucas, whose observant eyes sometimes held a depth of understanding that startled Edward, making him feel seen in a way no one else did. But even Lucas seemed adrift in the vast, opulent sea of the Grayson household, an anchorless ship in his father's gilded harbor. The memory of dinner earlier that evening tightened the knot in Edward's chest. The dining room, vast enough to host a state dinner, had felt cavernously empty with just the four of them. Crystal glasses gleamed under the bespoke chandelier, reflecting the untouched portions on gold-rimmed plates. Linda had been engrossed in her tablet, scrolling through auction sites, her expression animated only when discussing the potential acquisition of a rare necklace. Chloe, headphones perched delicately, giggled at some fleeting internet meme, oblivious to the world beyond her screen. Edward had sat in silence, the exquisite food tasteless in his mouth, the expensive wine doing nothing to numb the chill. He'd watched them, his family, existing in parallel universes connected only by bandwidth and bank accounts. Then Lucas had looked up, his brow furrowed slightly. "Dad, are you okay? You haven't touched your food." The simple question, laced with genuine concern, was a small lifeboat in an ocean of indifference. Edward forced a smile. "I'm fine, son. Just thinking." But the lie felt heavy. He wasn't fine. He was drowning. Drowning in the silence, in the pretense, in the soul-crushing realization that the fortress of wealth he'd built might have imprisoned the very things he valued most. He needed to know. He had to know if anything real remained beneath the layers of entitlement and expectation. Was there love, genuine and unconditional, buried somewhere under the mountain of his success? Or was he merely the keeper of the cage, tolerated only as long as the bars were made of gold? The thought solidified into a plan, audacious and potentially devastating, yet driven by a desperate need for truth. It was a gamble of the highest stakes, not with money, but with hearts, his own included. Later that night, long after the mansion had succumbed to its usual sterile quiet, Edward retreated to his study. The room, panelled in dark wood and lined with first editions, usually felt like a sanctuary. Tonight it felt like a command center for a war he was about to wage on his own life. He picked up the secure line, his hand steady despite the tremor in his soul. He dialed the number for James Carter, his fiercely loyal, discreet personal assistant, a man who knew more about Edward's life than perhaps anyone, yet always maintained a professional distance. "James," Edward's voice was low, devoid of its usual commanding resonance, replaced by a flat, resolute tone. "It's time. Initiate Protocol 0. There was a pause on the other end. James knew the code, a contingency plan discussed in hypotheticals years ago, a scorched earth scenario Edward had devised for a crisis far different than this internal one. "Sir, are you absolutely certain? Protocol 0, the ramifications are—" "I am certain, James," Edward cut him off, the finality sharp. "Liquidate the accessible holdings. Transfer everything untraceable to the designated offshore accounts. Fabricate the necessary documents, creditor calls, frozen assets, the works. It needs to look catastrophic, complete. Leak controlled rumors of insolvency to the usual channels. Cut off all lines of credit tied to the Grayson name, except for one basic card with a strict limit. You'll provide me separately." He continued, mapping out the grim details. "Inform the household staff their services are no longer required, effective immediately. Generous severance, of course, bound by strict non-disclosure agreements. Arrange for a modest vehicle, untraceable. And find the deed to my grandfather's old place, the one out past Willow Creek." "Sir," James's voice was strained, "this will shatter them. Linda, Chloe." "That's the point, James," Edward said, the words tasting like grit. "I need to see what remains when the gold dust settles. I need to know who stays when the palace crumbles." He paused, the weight of his decision pressing down. "And James, absolutely no one, under any circumstances, is to know I still hold the keys to the kingdom. This must be airtight. My future, Lucas's future, it depends on this." He hung up, the click of the receiver echoing in the suddenly vast room. The rain continued its relentless drumming against the glass. Edward looked at his reflection, the tired eyes, the lines etched by years of relentless ambition. He had built an empire, but tonight he felt like a king preparing to burn his own castle down, just to see who would dare to pull him from the flames. The pieces were set on the board, the first move made in the dead of night. Now came the dawn, and with it the daunting task of facing his family and detonating the carefully constructed reality they called life. How would the gilded birds react when their cage disappeared? Dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and tentative gold, but inside the Grayson penthouse the light failed to pierce the calculated twilight Edward had invoked. Was wealth truly the only chain binding them? The immense apartment was unnervingly quiet. Overnight, the subtle hum of a large household seemed to have ceased. No distant clatter of breakfast preparations from the kitchen staff, no hushed footsteps of the cleaning crew. James Carter had moved with swift surgical precision. Edward stood by the window again, watching the city awaken, feeling a strange mix of dread and grim determination. The die was cast. He heard Linda first, her voice usually melodic when pleased, carrying a sharp edge of impatience as she called for coffee that wouldn't arrive. Then Chloe emerged from her suite, yawning delicately, already scrolling through her phone, likely checking the overnight engagement on her latest post about a trivial luxury. They moved like automatons through the opulent space, accustomed to a level of service that had vanished while they slept. Edward turned, his face carefully composed into a mask of weary gravity. "Linda, Chloe, Lucas, please come to the living room. There's something I need to tell you." Linda paused, lowering her phone, a frown etching itself between her perfectly sculpted brows. "So early, Edward? Is this about the gallery opening tonight? I still haven't decided what to wear." Chloe sighed dramatically. "Dad, if this is another lecture about my spending—" "Please," Edward repeated, his voice low, cutting through their habitual concerns. There was a quality in his tone, a hollowness that finally seemed to register. Lucas, already present and observing his father with quiet intensity, straightened slightly. They gathered, reluctantly, in the cavernous living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, dust motes that shouldn't have been there. Linda sank onto a silk ottoman, arranging her robe impatiently. Chloe leaned against a marble pillar, tapping her foot. Lucas stood near his father, his gaze unwavering. Edward took a deep breath, the air feeling thick and heavy. He let the silence stretch, amplifying the unease. Then he spoke, the words dropping like stones into the stillness. "I have bad news, devastating news." He let his shoulders slump, channeling a weariness that wasn't entirely feigned. "The businesses, they're gone. A series of catastrophic investments, market collapse, everything has unraveled." He met Linda's gaze, then Chloe's, then Lucas's. "The banks have frozen everything, every account, every asset. We've lost it all. We have nothing left." For a heartbeat there was absolute silence. Linda stared, her perfectly made-up face frozen in disbelief. Chloe's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the polished floor. Then Linda sprang up, her voice shrill, cracking the expensive silence. "Lost everything? What are you talking about? Nothing left? This is a joke, Edward. A sick joke. Tell me you're joking." "I wish I were, Linda," Edward said, the feigned sadness in his voice warring with the genuine ache in his chest as he watched her mask of sophisticated indifference shatter, revealing raw panic underneath. It all happened so fast. Mismanagement, bad advice. He let the vague excuses hang in the air. "Mismanagement? Bad advice?" Linda advanced on him, her voice rising. "You built an empire. How could you let this happen? How could you be so incompetent, so utterly useless?" The word struck him, sharp and venomous. Chloe burst into tears, not tears of empathy, but of pure, unadulterated self-pity. "Nothing? We have nothing? My followers. My trip to Monaco next month. My credit cards. Dad, how could you do this to us?" Her distress was entirely focused on the crumbling facade of her online life. Only Lucas remained relatively still, though his face was pale. He looked from his distraught mother and sister to his father, his young eyes searching Edward's face for a truth beyond the words. "Dad?" His voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the rising hysteria. Are you serious? Edward met his son's gaze, the only one that seemed to hold a shred of genuine concern for him, not just the lifestyle he provided. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Yes, Lucas. It's the only reality we have now. The confirmation seemed to snap Linda's last thread of control. Reality. This isn't reality. This is a nightmare orchestrated by an imbecile. She gestured wildly around the opulent room. So what now? We live on the streets, beg for scraps. No, Edward said, delivering the final blow. We have to leave this place. Today. The creditors. He let the implication hang. There's only one place we can go now. My grandfather's old house. The one out in the village near Willow Creek. If the news of bankruptcy was a shockwave, the mention of the village was the Richter scale itself. Village, Chloe shrieked, horror contorting her features. A village, like, with dirt roads and no Wi-Fi? No, absolutely not. I'd rather die. Linda looked physically ill. That hovel. You expect me, Linda Grayson, to live in that primitive shack, after years of living like royalty? Are you insane, Edward? Have you completely lost your mind along with our fortune? It's all that's left, Linda, Edward said, his voice flat, betraying no emotion, though inside he flinched at their raw disgust, their utter lack of concern for anything but their own comfort. He was observing the first results of his cruel experiment, and the findings were already chilling. You useless man, Linda screamed, her face flushed with rage and fear. How could you destroy our lives like this? What kind of provider, what kind of man are you? Edward didn't answer. He couldn't. Engaging further would unravel the carefully constructed facade. He simply turned, the picture of a defeated man, and walked towards the grand entryway, leaving the wreckage of his announcement behind him. He felt, rather than saw, Lucas follow, a hesitant touch on his arm. Dad, Lucas said softly, his voice thick with emotion but steady. Don't worry. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Everything will be okay. Edward stopped, turning slightly. He looked into his son's eyes, eyes filled not with accusation or panic, but with a steadfast loyalty that felt like the only solid ground left in his collapsing world. He managed a small, grateful nod, a lump forming in his throat. Thank you, Lucas, he whispered, the words barely audible. Thank you. In the midst of the storm he had unleashed, this one small act of faith felt like an unexpected, precious gift. He straightened his shoulders, the weight of the next stage of his plan settling upon him. Leaving the echoing accusations and panicked tears behind him, Edward walked towards the door, Lucas a silent shadow at his side. The gilded cage was about to be abandoned, but what terrors and truths awaited them beyond its bars on the dusty road ahead? The massive penthouse doors clicked shut, a final definitive sound sealing away a life of effortless luxury. Ahead lay an unknown road, dusty and uncertain. Would the journey strip away only their possessions, or the very essence of who they believed themselves to be? The hours following Edward's devastating announcement bled into a blur of frantic, chaotic motion, underscored by a chilling silence where the hum of household staff should have been. The absence was palpable, amplifying the raw edges of their new reality. Linda, her face a mask of disbelief and fury, moved through her palatial dressing room like a whirlwind, grabbing at jewelry, shoving designer gowns into bags far too small, her movements jerky with panic. That hideous necklace Aunt Carol gave me, worthless. Where are my Manolos? Edward, you idiot. How could you not have saved the Manolos? Her accusations bounced off the silk-lined walls, directed at a husband who wasn't there, lost in the whirlwind of her own unraveling. Chloe, meanwhile, had collapsed onto her velvet chaise lounge amidst a sea of discarded couture, sobbing dramatically into a cashmere throw pillow. Her grief wasn't for the lost fortune, but for the lost audience. My followers will die, she wailed, punctuated by hiccups. How can I post anything from a village? My life is over. It's literally over. He's ruined everything. Between sobs, she frantically typed messages on her phone, likely crafting a suitably tragic narrative for her online sympathizers, until the realization that the mansion's high-speed Wi-Fi would soon be a memory sent her into a fresh spiral of despair. Amidst the histrionics, Lucas moved with quiet efficiency. His face was somber, etched with a gravity far beyond his years, but his hands were steady as he packed a single duffel bag. Practical clothes, toiletries, a worn copy of a classic novel, a framed photo of him and Edward taken on a fishing trip years ago, small anchors in the storm. He didn't complain, didn't accuse, he simply packed, his silence a stark contrast to the noise filling the rest of the suite. He paused by Chloe's door, seeing her performative grief, and a flicker of something unreadable, pity, frustration, crossed his face before he turned away. Edward oversaw the grim proceedings from a distance, leaning against a doorframe, his expression carefully neutral. He watched Linda prioritize gemstones over sentiment, watched Chloe mourn social status more than security. Each frantic grab, each tearful lament over a lost luxury was a data point in his cruel calculus. Did they pack anything that spoke of love, of memory, or only of monetary value? The question hung heavy in the air, heavier than the expensive perfume Linda was trying desperately to cram into a side pocket. The stark reality of their choices, even in these first moments of crisis, solidified the grim necessity of his plan. The final departure felt surreal. They walked through the echoing marble foyer, their footsteps loud in the unnatural silence. No doorman rushed to open the towering, ornate doors. Edward pushed them open himself, the heavy bronze cool beneath his hand. Outside, instead of the gleaming Bentley or the sleek Rolls-Royce, sat a nondescript 10-year-old sedan, practical, reliable, and utterly anonymous. James Carter had chosen well. Linda recoiled as if struck. "We're driving—" "In that?" Her voice dripped with contempt. Chloe stared at the vehicle aghast. "It looks like something the gardener would drive." Edward ignored them, loading the few bags Lucas carried into the trunk. Lucas got into the back seat without a word. After a moment of indignant hesitation, realizing there was no alternative, Linda slid into the passenger seat, pulling her expensive wrap tightly around her as if to ward off contamination. Chloe slumped into the back beside Lucas, immediately putting in earbuds, shutting out the world and her family. The drive out of the city was a slow, grinding shift in perspective. Polished skyscrapers gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to frayed industrial zones, and finally to the open highway that stretched towards the unfamiliar territory of the countryside. Inside the car, the atmosphere was thick with resentment. Linda kept up a running commentary of complaints, the inadequate air conditioning, the bumps in the road, the questionable upholstery. "I can't believe this, Edward. Reduced to traveling like commoners. My skin is already breaking out from the stress. And this smell—" Chloe occasionally chimed in with a sigh or a pointed remark about the lack of decent radio stations or, more devastatingly, the complete absence of a cellular signal as they drove further from urban centers. Her digital lifeline was severed. Edward drove, his hands gripping the wheel, knuckles white. He kept his eyes fixed on the road, tuning out Linda's tirade, though each word felt like a small, sharp stone striking his resolve. He glanced in the rearview mirror occasionally, catching Lucas's eye. His son wasn't looking at the passing scenery with disgust, but with a quiet curiosity. He seemed to be absorbing the transition, processing it. Once, when the car hit a particularly rough patch, jostling them violently, Lucas reached forward almost instinctively and squeezed Edward's shoulder. A small gesture, unnoticed by the others, but it spoke volumes. It was a silent promise. "I'm still here, Dad." As they turned off the main highway onto narrower country roads, the landscape changed dramatically. Manicured lawns were replaced by overgrown fields, strip malls by weathered barns. They passed through small, sleepy towns where time seemed to move slower, where faces looked worn but resilient. Edward saw glimpses of a life vastly different from the one they had left, a life perhaps simpler, harder, but maybe, just maybe, more real. He saw genuine poverty too, weathered houses with sagging porches, children playing with makeshift toys. He watched Linda and Chloe avert their eyes, their discomfort bordering on disdain. There was no flicker of empathy, only annoyance that such sights intruded upon their misery. It was another turn of the screw, tightening his conviction. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as they climbed into rolling hills. The paved road eventually gave way to gravel, then to a deeply rutted dirt track barely wide enough for the car. Branches scraped against the windows. The final leg of their journey had begun. The complaints in the front seat finally subsided, replaced by an apprehensive silence. Even Chloe had removed her earbuds, peering out the window with wide, nervous eyes. They were entering the wilderness, leaving behind not just their wealth, but the entire civilization that had defined them. The car bumped and lurched onto the final stretch of dirt track, dense woods closing in like judgmental walls. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, lay the silhouette of a forgotten structure, shrouded in neglect. Reality, stark and unforgiving, was waiting just beyond the next bend. The rutted track finally ended, spitting the sedan out into a clearing choked with weeds. The journey's end wasn't just a location, but a brutal confrontation with the crushing weight of their fallen fortunes. Could they even breathe the air of such stark humility? The car sputtered to a halt before a structure that seemed less like a house and more like a forgotten relic, surrendering to the slow siege of nature. The paint, once perhaps white, peeled away in long, leprous strips, revealing weathered grey wood beneath. The porch sagged precariously, one corner dipping towards the overgrown earth, as if exhausted. Shutters hung askew from grime-streaked windows, like broken eyelids on a blind face. Wild vines snaked up the walls, blurring the lines between the man-made and the wild. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of damp soil, decaying leaves, and an underlying hint of mildew. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects and the distant caw of a crow. For a long moment no one moved. The reality outside the car windows seemed too stark, too offensive to comprehend. Then Linda slowly pushed her door open, stepping out onto the uneven ground as if testing fragile ice. Her meticulously styled hair seemed instantly out of place against the backdrop of decay. She took one look at the house, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. Then louder, her voice trembling with disbelief and rising panic. "No, Edward, tell me this isn't it. Tell me this is some kind of cruel joke." She backed away, stumbling slightly on a tree root, her eyes wide with horror. "This isn't a house. It's a tomb. Are you mad? We cannot possibly live here." Chloe emerged next, moving with the cautious disgust of someone wading through filth. She wrinkled her nose, pulling the collar of her expensive silk blouse up over her mouth. "Ugh, God, what is that putrid smell? It's making me sick." Her eyes darted around, scanning the derelict structure, searching in vain for any sign of modern convenience. There's no satellite dish, no proper driveway. Is that an outhouse back there?" she asked, pointing a trembling finger towards a smaller, even more dilapidated shed, half hidden by weeds. The color drained from her face. Edward stepped out, his movements measured. He surveyed the scene, his face an impassive mask, though inside a strange mix of emotions churned, a pang of nostalgia for the grandfather he barely knew, quickly overshadowed by the grim satisfaction of seeing his plan's brutal effectiveness mirrored in his wife and daughter's reactions. This place, stripped bare of pretense, was the perfect crucible. "This belonged to my late father," he stated calmly, his voice steady. "It's basic, but we'll manage here. For now." "Manage?" Linda shrieked, finding her voice again, laced with pure venom. "Manage? Me, Linda Grayson? After years, decades of enduring your ambition, your absences, all for the comfort you promised, you expect me to manage inside this rubbish? You want to bury me alive in this dead place? You must be certifiably insane." She paced back and forth, her movements agitated, trapped between the offensive reality of the house and the inadequate refuge of the old sedan. Chloe shook her head violently, tears finally spilling over. I can't survive here, Daddy. I literally can't. There's probably no Wi-Fi, no air conditioning, no decent bathroom mirror. Look at this place. It stinks. There are probably rats. How do people even exist like this? Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch. Only Lucas exited the car without protest. He stood for a moment, taking in the scene. The crumbling house, the overgrown yard, the palpable despair radiating from his mother and sister. His young face was pale, his eyes wide, reflecting the grim reality. But then his gaze shifted to his father, a silent question passing between them before he resolutely turned towards the trunk. "Let's get the bags, Dad," he said quietly, his voice the only calm note in the discordant symphony of horror. He picked up 2 duffels and headed towards the sagging porch. The front door, paint blistered and wood warped, looked barely attached to its hinges. Lucas hesitated for a second, then pushed it open. A groan of protesting wood echoed in the clearing as the door swung inward, revealing a glimpse of the gloom within. Edward watched him go, then turned back to the car. "We have no choice, Linda. This is all we have." Linda recoiled again, pulling her wrap tighter. "Don't you touch me. Don't you dare try to force me into that shack. Take me back to the city, Edward. Take me back now. I refuse to set foot in there." Chloe sobbed beside her. "I should have just stayed with my boyfriend. Anywhere is better than this hellhole." Lucas reappeared at the doorway, his expression strained. "Mom? Chloe? Arguing isn't going to help. Shouldn't we try to support Dad? We're all in this together." Linda shot him a look filled with such fury it made him flinch. "Will you shut your mouth, Lucas? Must you always be his little defender? You think we want to be here? You think we enjoy suffering because of his incompetence? Go on, go play the martyr with your useless father." Lucas visibly recoiled from her words, shaking his head in disbelief. He looked at his father, then back at the dark, unwelcoming interior of the house, and without another word, he turned and disappeared inside, the sound of his footsteps on the dusty floorboards, swallowed by the shadows. Edward felt a surge of cold anger towards Linda, but suppressed it, maintaining his facade of weary resignation. He picked up the remaining bags. "We stay here," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument, though devoid of its usual authority. He started towards the house, leaving Linda and Chloe standing by the car, trapped between the life they had lost and the nightmare that now stood before them. The decaying house seemed to loom over them, a silent, crumbling monument to their fallen fortunes, its dark windows like empty eyes watching their gilded world finally shatter into dust. The door creaked shut, trapping them within the 4 decaying walls. The sounds of protest outside faded, replaced by the suffocating silence of the hovel and the daunting reality of their first night in exile. Stripped of everything they knew, how would they even survive until morning in this forgotten corner of the world? The initial shock of arrival began to fade, replaced by the relentless grind of survival. Stripped of illusion, the true test wasn't just enduring the squalor of the hovel, but enduring the fraying edges of each other in the crucible of hardship. The first night in the hovel was a descent into a primitive nightmare. Sleep offered little refuge on the thin, lumpy mattress spread across the dusty floorboards. Mosquitoes whined incessantly in the oppressive darkness, their bites leaving itchy welts. Strange nocturnal rustlings from the walls and roof tormented Linda and Chloe, who tossed and turned, swatting blindly in the dark, muttering curses under their breath. Linda imagined critters crawling over her, her skin prickling with revulsion. Chloe cried silently, mourning her silk sheets and climate-controlled environment. Edward lay awake, staring into the oppressive blackness, listening to the symphony of misery around him. The slap of a hand against skin, a stifled sob, the ragged breathing of his family trapped in this self-inflicted purgatory. Beside him, Lucas seemed to sleep, but his stillness felt tense, watchful. Dawn arrived not with gentle light, but with the jarring crow of an unseen rooster nearby, followed swiftly by the inescapable realities of their new life. There was no plumbing, only the dilapidated outhouse veiled by weeds at the edge of the property. A horror Linda and Chloe refused to approach initially, leading to strained, undignified standoffs. Water had to be fetched in heavy buckets from a communal well a quarter-mile down the dusty track, a task that left their unaccustomed hands blistered and raw. Cooking meant battling smoke and frustration over a crude fire pit Edward and Lucas constructed in the yard, using damp wood that sputtered and smoked more than it burned. Their diet shifted drastically. Gone were the imported delicacies, the gourmet meals prepared by private chefs. Now, sustenance consisted primarily of dry cassava, sometimes boiled into a bland paste, or a thin, fiery pepper soup utterly devoid of meat or substance. Linda would pick at her portion with undisguised disgust, often pushing it away after a single bite, her face pinched with resentment. "How can anyone eat this peasant food?" she'd lament, conveniently forgetting it was all they had. Chloe complained constantly of hunger, of feeling weak, dramatically recounting the elaborate meals she used to take for granted. Lucas ate silently, methodically, his gaze fixed on his plate, though Edward noticed the hollows deepening under his son's cheekbones. Edward, determined to maintain the charade and perhaps driven by a deeper need to prove something, suggested they try cultivating the small barren plot of land behind the hovel. "If we're going to eat, we need to work the land," he announced one sweltering morning, picking up a rusty hoe left leaning against the wall. Linda, fanning herself listlessly under the meager shade of a straggly tree, let out a bark of incredulous laughter. "Farm? Did I hear you correctly, Edward? You expect me to grub in the dirt? Like some field hand? Absolutely not. My manicures alone cost more than this entire wretched village." Chloe folded her arms, striking a pose of offended royalty. "Me? Hold a hoe? Never. I wasn't raised to do manual labor. I'll break a nail. Besides, the sun will ruin my complexion." Edward felt a familiar weariness wash over him, but Lucas stepped forward, taking the heavy tool from his father's hand. "Let's go, Dad. I'll go with you. Show me what to do." Pride swelled in Edward's chest, a painful counterpoint to the disappointment. "All right, son, let's go." The land proved as unforgiving as Linda's scorn. The earth was baked hard by the sun, resisting the bite of the hoe. Sweat poured down their faces, stinging their eyes, plastering their shirts to their backs. Edward, whose hands were more accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts than wielding farm tools, quickly developed painful blisters. He struggled with the unfamiliar labor, his muscles screaming in protest. Lucas, though equally inexperienced, tackled the task with quiet determination, observing, learning, pushing through the discomfort without complaint. They worked for hours under the merciless sun, achieving little more than scratching the surface of the stubborn ground, while Linda and Chloe watched from afar, their expressions a mixture of contempt and boredom. As days bled into weeks, the initial shock hardened into distinct patterns of behavior. Edward and Lucas fell into a routine of shared hardship, fetching water, struggling with the fire, attempting repairs on the crumbling house, their bond strengthening through unspoken understanding and mutual reliance. Edward found himself observing his son with growing admiration. Lucas's resilience, his practicality, his unwavering loyalty were beacons in the encroaching darkness. He saw the man Lucas was becoming, forged in the fires of this manufactured adversity. Conversely, Linda and Chloe retreated further into bitterness and resentment. They spent their days complaining, reminiscing loudly about their lost luxuries, and subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, blaming Edward for their plight. Their conversations became whispered conspiracies, their gazes often drifting towards the village road, scanning for any potential distraction, or perhaps escape. The shared hardship, instead of uniting the family, was cleaving it in two. Linda, particularly, seemed consumed by a simmering rage, her frustration occasionally boiling over into sharp, cruel remarks directed at Edward, chipping away at his carefully maintained facade of weary acceptance. Chloe mirrored her mother, her vanity curdling into a sullen, resentful indolence. Edward watched it all, the observer in his own bleak drama. Each complaint, each disdainful look, each refusal to participate in their shared survival was further proof, hardening his resolve. Yet sometimes, late at night, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the walls, he felt a pang of something akin to guilt. Had he gone too far? Was this test worth the utter destruction of what little connection remained with his wife and daughter? But then he would see Lucas, sleeping soundly despite the discomfort, his face peaceful in the moonlight, and the conviction returned. He was doing this for Lucas too, to show him what truly mattered, to free him from the suffocating weight of their family's gilded cage. The scars were forming, deep and indelible, but perhaps, for father and son, they were scars of survival, not just of loss. Weeks bled into a month, marked by the scorching sun above and the simmering resentment within the hovel's walls. While hardship forged an unbreakable bond between father and son, it pushed mother and daughter ever closer to the precipice of desperation. How long before that desperation cracked their resolve completely, sending them searching for salvation in the most dangerous, deceptive places the village had to offer? The relentless weight of hardship pressed down, grinding patience into dust and chipping away at pride until only raw desperation remained. When opportunity, however tainted, seemed to whisper promises of escape, would moral fortitude stand even a fleeting chance? Another week dissolved into the monotonous rhythm of hardship at the hovel. The meager attempts at farming yielded little more than blisters and frustration. The food remained bland, the nights uncomfortable, the future bleak. For Edward and Lucas, the shared struggle continued to forge a quiet resilience, a partnership built on mutual respect and endurance. But for Linda and Chloe, the unrelenting deprivation acted like an acid, eating away at their composure, dissolving their already fragile sense of self-worth, tied so inextricably to material comfort. The breaking point wasn't a single dramatic event, but a slow, grinding erosion. For Linda, it came after a particularly humiliating afternoon, trying to wash clothes by hand in a murky stream, her knuckles raw, her back aching, while a group of village women nearby openly tittered at the former city socialite's ineptitude. Returning to the hovel, feeling grimy, defeated and utterly invisible, she caught sight of her reflection in a shard of broken mirror Lucas had propped against the wall. The woman staring back was a stranger, hair lank, face drawn, eyes dulled by despair. The image was intolerable. "No," a voice screamed inside her head. "This is not me. I was not meant for this degradation." That evening, a new resolve hardened her features. Edward was finished, she told herself firmly, a relic of a past life. There was no point waiting for a miracle from him. If salvation was to come, she would have to seize it herself. And the image of Mr. Bradford, his confident swagger, his supposedly gold chains, the way the villagers seemed to defer to him, flickered in her mind like a beacon. He looked interested, she reasoned. He seemed powerful here. Maybe he could offer a lifeline. Just a conversation, she told herself, just to see. What harm could it do? She ruthlessly suppressed the nagging voice that whispered of betrayal, burying it under layers of self-pity and entitlement. With deliberate care, she retrieved the one silk scarf she'd managed to salvage, tying it artfully around her neck. She used the last dregs of a hidden face cream, applied a touch of lipstick she'd kept concealed. It was a warrior putting on her armor, albeit for a morally dubious campaign. She timed her exit carefully, feigning a need for fresh air, and steered her steps towards the part of the village where she knew Mr. Bradford often held court under the large mango tree. She happened upon him as if by chance, adopting an air of weary vulnerability, her steps slightly hesitant. "Oh, Mr. Bradford," she greeted, her voice soft, tinged with a calculated sadness. "Forgive me, I was just trying to clear my head." Bradford, lounging on his usual stool, beamed. His eyes, sharp and appraising, swept over her, noting the effort she'd made despite her circumstances. "My dear lady, no need for forgiveness. The sight of you brightens this dusty village." He gestured to an empty stool beside him. "Please, join me. Escape the troubles for a moment." Linda sank onto the stool, offering a fragile smile. The flattery, however insincere, felt like a balm to her wounded pride. She began to subtly recount her woes, emphasizing Edward's failure and her own undeserved suffering. Bradford listened intently, nodding sympathetically, his hand occasionally brushing hers, accidentally. He spoke of his own influence, hinted at connections beyond the village, painted a picture of a life far removed from the squalor she currently endured. Linda leaned in, absorbing his words like a parched plant soaking up rain, ignoring the warning bells that faintly chimed in the back of her mind. The first hook had been baited, and she was nibbling eagerly. Chloe reached her own tipping point a few days later. Scrolling aimlessly through the few cached images on her phone, ghosts of her former life, she felt a wave of such intense longing and bitterness that it almost choked her. The final straw was seeing a village girl, barely younger than herself, proudly showing off a simple, brightly colored plastic bracelet. It wasn't envy, precisely, but a stark reminder of everything she had lost, down to the ability to possess even the cheapest trinket. Survival wasn't enough. She needed adornment, tangible proof that she wasn't fading into this drab landscape. Her thoughts turned cold and sharp to Mr. Collins. He was unattractive, crude even, but he had access to goods, to money, and he desired her. It was a transaction, pure and simple. She wouldn't allow herself sentiment or shame. This was about reclaiming a piece of herself, by any means necessary. Her plan solidified, focusing not just on the immediate cash or gifts Collins offered, but on the rumor she'd subtly confirmed, the valuable antique necklace his wife apparently owned, something he sometimes kept in his shop's back room safe. That was the real prize. That evening she slipped away, dressed in the tight, shiny gown Collins had already given her, a gaudy banner announcing her availability. She found him at the village's only dimly lit bar, holding court among a group of local men. She caught his eye, offered a slow, deliberate smile. He excused himself immediately, joining her at a secluded corner table. "Missing the city lights, beautiful?" he asked, his gaze greedy. "More than you know," Chloe replied, letting a calculated vulnerability soften her features. "It's just so hard here. I feel like I'm disappearing." Collins leaned closer, placing a familiar hand on her arm. "I told you, I can make things comfortable. A pretty thing like you shouldn't suffer." He produced a small wad of cash. "A little something to brighten your day." Chloe accepted it with a practiced smile, but her mind was already working. "You're too kind, Mr. Collins. It's just, sometimes I see things in your shop. Beautiful things. Like that old necklace Mrs. Collins wore to the festival. It reminds me of what I used to have." She let her voice trail off wistfully. Collins preened, flattered by her attention to his wife's possessions. "Ah, yes. A family heirloom. Very valuable." He lowered his voice. Perhaps one day you could try it on." Chloe's heart gave a small leap. Hooked. "Oh, could I? That would be amazing," she breathed, letting her eyes widen with feigned innocence. The game was afoot. While mother and daughter took their first concrete steps onto treacherous ground, Edward and Lucas continued their Sisyphean struggle against the stubborn earth. Edward watched Linda return later that day, humming softly, a strange, brittle brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. He saw Chloe examining the small bills Collins had given her, a calculating look replacing her usual sullenness. He didn't know the specifics, not yet, but the air felt different, charged with secrets and impending betrayal. The lines were being drawn, the family fracturing along fault lines he had deliberately exposed. The first compromises felt like small concessions, easily rationalized away as necessary steps towards reclaiming a lost life. Both Linda and Chloe felt a dangerous, intoxicating flicker of false hope, blissfully unaware that the paths they had just chosen led not to salvation, but deeper into a suffocating web of deceit from which escape would soon be impossible. As the relentless days blurred into a monotonous cycle of hardship, secret hopes began to bloom in the shadows, nourished by whispers of deceit and the potent drug of desperation. But flowers grown in darkness rarely lead towards the light. The initial frantic desperation began to settle into a more insidious routine within the crumbling walls of the hovel. While Edward and Lucas found a rhythm in their shared struggle, carving moments of quiet understanding amidst the physical toll, Linda and Chloe embarked on parallel journeys into deeper deception, each weaving her own web of secrets. Linda's transformation was marked by a brittle, almost feverish energy. The crushing despair that had initially consumed her was replaced by a carefully cultivated clandestine hope pinned entirely on Mr. Bradford. Her afternoons developed a predictable pattern. Under the guise of joining a non-existent village women's group or fetching firewood she never intended to gather, she would meticulously prepare herself. A splash of hoarded perfume behind the ears, the silk scarf arranged just so, a touch of defiant color on her lips. Edward watched these preparations with a silent, heavy heart, recognizing the familiar rituals of vanity, now repurposed for a different, more desperate campaign. He said nothing, letting the charade play out. Each careful application of lipstick another piece of evidence in his grim assessment. Her destination was invariably the Golden Moon Lodge, the village's only establishment aspiring to grandeur, though its faded paint and slightly dusty lobby fell considerably short. Emily, the young receptionist whose loyalty had been cheaply bought by Bradford with weekly handouts, would offer Linda a knowing, complicit smile and direct her discreetly towards the back room Bradford favored. Inside, Bradford played the part of the magnate-in-waiting to perfection. Lounging in shorts and a singlet, his fake gold chains gleaming against his chest, he'd greet Linda with booming pronouncements. My queen, more radiant than ever. He'd offer her roasted meat, cool drinks materialized from a hidden cooler, luxuries that felt impossibly decadent after the hovel's meager fare. Linda, starved for affection and affirmation as much as for decent food, drank it all in. You deserve only the best, my dear Linda, Bradford declared one sweltering afternoon, popping a piece of greasy meat into her waiting mouth. These rough circumstances, they are temporary, an insult to your beauty. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Listen, I've been making plans, big plans. Linda's eyes widened. Plans? Yes. You know my current wives, all four of them. He waved a dismissive hand. Insignificant. Baggage. I plan to send them all packing soon. They don't understand me, not like you do. You, he tapped her hand possessively, are the only woman who truly satisfies a man like me. Linda felt a giddy rush. All of them? All of them, he confirmed. I want to marry you, Linda. Build you a proper house right here in this village, bigger, finer than anything else around. A palace fit for my queen. He saw the captivated look on her face and pressed his advantage. And that's not all. You know the town mayor. Old fellow, coughing his lungs out day and night. The elders. They favor me to take his place when the time comes. I've been generous, he winked, tapping his nose. Very generous. Bags of rice, goats, the finest. They see me as the future. Linda gasped, her mind racing. So, if you become mayor, then I would be... The mayoress, naturally, Queen Linda of Willow Creek, Bradford boomed, throwing his head back in laughter. He pulled her closer, his breath hot against her ear. Leave that useless husband of yours, Linda. That poor man is finished. Come live your best life with me. Let me spoil you. I have connections, land, more than you can imagine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled bundle of bills. Here, take this. Buy yourself some pretty new wrappers, a down payment on our future. Linda clutched the money as if it were salvation itself, her heart pounding with treacherous excitement. The hovel, Edward's weary face, the hardships, they all seemed to fade away, replaced by visions of silk, status, and escape. Oh, Chief, Mr. Bradford, you are too kind. An angel, she breathed, completely ensnared. She barely registered the cheapness of the room, the dubious nature of his claims, choosing instead to believe in the golden fantasy he spun. Chloe's machinations were less about fantasy and more about cold, hard calculation. Her meetings with Mr. Collins were furtive, often taking place in the dusty back room of his small village shop or down a secluded path near his neglected farm plot. Collins, puffed up with self-importance at having snagged a city girl, readily provided her with small sums of money and cheap trinkets, bragging about his business acumen and local standing. Chloe played her part expertly, feigning interest in his boring stories, flattering his ego, accepting his clumsy advances with a practiced air of reluctance that only seemed to fuel his desire. All the while, her sharp eyes were cataloguing the contents of the shop, probing for information about his routine, his security measures, and most importantly, the location of his wife's antique necklace. "You keep everything so secure back here, Mr. Collins," she remarked casually one evening, glancing towards the heavy wooden door leading to his storeroom. "Must have valuable things." Collins puffed out his chest. "Of course, a man of my standing must protect his assets. Got the best lock in the village on that door, and a safe inside, bolted to the floor. Can't be too careful," he winked. "Especially with treasures like my wife's necklace sometimes stored there." Chloe filed the information away, a predatory gleam in her eyes masked by a demure smile. Bolted safe. Good lock. The challenge only made the potential reward more enticing. This wasn't about love or even comfort. It was about acquisition, about clawing her way back, one compromise step at a time. While these secret dramas unfolded, Lucas felt an increasing weight of unease. He noticed the subtle shifts, his mother humming unfamiliar tunes after her firewood excursions, returning with the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to her clothes. Chloe suddenly possessing small amounts of cash, buying herself sweets at the village market stall, her explanations vague and dismissive. He saw the whispered conversations between them that ceased abruptly whenever he approached. Then came the more concrete clue. Worried about his mother's extended absence one afternoon, Lucas had discreetly followed the path she usually took. From a distance, hidden behind a thicket of bushes, he saw her slip into the Golden Moon Lodge. He knew the place by reputation, not somewhere a respectable woman, let alone his mother, should be frequenting alone. The image burned itself into his mind. Later that week, while tidying the single room they all shared, a task Linda and Chloe studiously avoided, he found a small, cheap-looking bracelet tucked under Chloe's pillow, something he'd never seen before and knew his father hadn't given her. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. His mother meeting someone at the lodge, his sister receiving secret gifts. The memory of the overheard phone call mentioning Bradford and debt resurfaced. A cold dread washed over him. He didn't know the full extent of it, but he knew with a certainty that made him feel ill that his mother and sister were involved in something secretive, something shameful. He looked at his father, working silently outside, mending a broken chair, his face etched with lines of worry Lucas now understood were likely deeper than just their supposed poverty. Should he tell him? Burden him further, or keep the terrible knowledge to himself? The silence in the hovel felt heavier than ever, thick with unspoken truths and the poisonous bloom of betrayal. The web of secrets tightened, pulling taut around the inhabitants of the hovel. While Linda dreamt of phantom thrones and Chloe plotted her glittering escape, Lucas wrestled with a troubling certainty. A crack in the family's facade that threatened to shatter their fragile existence entirely. How much longer could these dangerous liaisons remain hidden before detonating with devastating force? In the suffocating intimacy of village life, secrets festered like wounds beneath thin bandages, refusing to stay hidden. It was only a matter of time before one tore open, spilling its venom into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on the dusty compound, baking the earth and wilting the already struggling weeds. Inside the hovel, the air was stagnant and hot. Chloe, however, seemed determined to project an air of bored indifference to their squalid surroundings. She sat outside on one of the plastic chairs, tilted back precariously, chewing gum with rhythmic monotony while scrolling through the cached, lifeless feed on her phone. She wore the tight, slightly too shiny gown Mr. Collins had given her, a defiant splash of misplaced glamour against the backdrop of decay. She seemed almost to be holding court, waiting for an audience that wasn't there, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the whispers that had begun to circulate through the village like wildfire. Small communities have long memories and sharp eyes. Chloe's increasingly frequent furtive meetings with Mr. Collins, a man known for his wandering eye and his long-suffering wife, had not gone unnoticed. Glances were exchanged at the market, heads nodded knowingly at the well. Lucas felt the weight of those glances, the unspoken pity or censure directed towards his family. and had tried once to gently caution his sister. "Chloe, people are talking," he'd murmured. "Maybe you should be more careful." He was met with a dismissive shrug and a sneer. "Let the peasants gossip, what do I care?" But gossip, left unchecked, often finds a way to ignite. That afternoon, the whispers erupted into a full-blown storm. A figure appeared at the edge of the compound, walking with a determined, heavy tread that kicked up dust. It was Mrs. Collins, her face a grim mask of righteous fury, her eyes narrowed, fixed solely on Chloe. She wasn't alone. A few curious neighbors paused their chores, their expressions ranging from pity to morbid curiosity, forming a reluctant audience at the periphery. "Where is she?" Mrs. Collins's voice was loud, raw with pain and anger, cutting through the afternoon stillness. "Where is that shameless husband-stealer? Come out here, you useless girl." Chloe looked up slowly, deliberately blowing a pink bubble before letting it pop. She crossed her legs, the picture of insolent calm. "Yes?" she asked, raising one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her voice dripping with manufactured boredom. "Who's making all that noise like a madwoman?" Mrs. Collins marched further into the compound, stopping a few feet from Chloe, her hands clenched at her sides. You are the one I came to see. Shameless creature," she spat, her voice trembling. "Stay away from my husband. Do you hear me? Stay away from him." Chloe let out a short, derisive laugh. My. Aren't we territorial?" "Your husband, madam." She stood up slowly, stretching languidly like a cat, deliberately emphasizing her youth and figure in the tight dress. "Please don't make me laugh. The poor man practically begged for my attention. He came to me. What was I supposed to do? Send him away crying?" Mrs. Collins' face flushed a deep red. "Shut your filthy mouth. I have been married to that man for 18 years. 18 years of building a life, raising children. And now a little gutter snipe like you, barely old enough to know anything, thinks she can waltz in and destroy everything?" Chloe stepped closer, chewing her gum defiantly, looking Mrs. Collins up and down with exaggerated disdain. 18 years? Well, no wonder he's bored. She gestured vaguely at Mrs. Collins's simple, worn dress and work-roughened hands. "Look at you. You look like poverty itself wrapped in faded cloth. Your skin is dry as roasted plantain. He probably needed a change, something fresh and exciting. Not this." The cruelty was deliberate, calculated to inflict maximum pain. You dare insult me?" Mrs. Collins gasped, visibly shaking now. "Insult you?" Chloe feigned surprise. "I'm merely stating the obvious. Let me give you some advice, old woman." She leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Don't try to fight me. You're too local, too classless. Your husband wants excitement, someone who understands luxury, not someone smelling of wood smoke and village dust. He wants me. You hear me?" Tears welled in Mrs. Collins's eyes, tears of helpless rage and humiliation. She pointed a trembling finger at Chloe. God will judge you for this. You mark my words." With a final choked sob, she turned and stumbled away, defeated, the murmurs of the onlookers following her like a shroud. Just as the dust settled from Mrs. Collins's retreat, Edward stepped out from around the corner of the hovel where he had been patiently trying to mend a broken chair leg. He had been close enough. He had heard every venomous word, seen every contemptuous gesture. His face was pale, etched with a profound weariness that went deeper than physical labor. "Chloe," he called softly, his voice strained. She spun around, rolling her eyes dramatically, caught off guard but quickly resuming her defiant posture. "Oh great, here we go. Lecture time?" "I heard everything," Edward said, walking slowly towards her, the broken chair leg forgotten in his hand. His heart felt like a lead weight in his chest. "Is it true, Chloe? What that woman said? Are you involved with her husband?" Chloe examined her fingernails with intense concentration, refusing to meet his eyes. "So what if I am?" she replied flippantly, the gum still working in her jaw. Edward stopped in front of her. His voice was quiet, but laced with a pain that was almost unbearable. "My daughter, Chloe, this is wrong. Terribly wrong. You're young. You have your whole future ahead of you. Why would you deliberately inflict this kind of pain? Why destroy someone's home, someone's family? Chloe finally looked up, her eyes hard and cold. Why? You want to know why, Dad? She spat the word out. Maybe you should ask yourself that question. Who dragged us from a beautiful mansion, from friends, from a life, to this disgusting dirt patch? Who couldn't manage his own affairs well enough to keep us safe? You did. Her voice rose, trembling not with remorse, but with accumulated bitterness. I know things are hard now, but that doesn't justify... But what? She cut him off sharply. But nothing. I hate this life. You ruined everything. I had status. I had followers. I had boys begging to date me. Now look at me. I smell like smoke. I'm wearing cheap clothes Collins bought me. I'm fighting off desperate village housewives. And it's all because of you. Tears of self-pity streamed down her face now, mixing with her anger. You call yourself my father. You lost the right to preach morality to me when you threw us into this pit. Tears stung Edward's own eyes, but he blinked them back fiercely. All I am saying, he whispered, his voice hoarse, is that you should stop this. Stop hurting others. Stop hurting yourself. This path, it leads nowhere good. Chloe let out a short, bitter laugh. What life should I focus on? The one you destroyed. You couldn't protect your company. You couldn't protect your family. Look around, Dad. We're living like rats. You are the reason we're suffering. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. So don't you dare judge me. I don't care what you think. I'll do whatever it takes to survive this nightmare you created. She turned on her heel and stormed into the hovel, slamming the flimsy door behind her, leaving Edward standing alone in the oppressive heat, the silence broken only by the buzzing of flies and the heavy thudding of his own broken heart. From inside, through the grimy window, Lucas watched, his face pale, his fists clenched at his sides, helpless. Chloe vanished into the hovel's gloom, leaving behind a silence thick with venom and shattered illusions. Edward stood alone under the unforgiving sun, the ugly truth of his daughter's choices laid bare, the whispers of the village now surely turning into damning shouts. How long before the next scandal erupted, dragging what remained of their fractured family further into ruin? Drunk on borrowed dreams and phantom promises spun from desperation, Linda walked a tightrope of fragile delusion high above the squalor of her reality. But truth, sharp-edged and entirely unforgiving, was about to sever the rope beneath her feet. Feeling buoyed by Mr. Bradford's recent attentions and the bundle of cash tucked securely away, Linda stepped out into the village path with a renewed, if misplaced, sense of purpose. The dust still rose with each step, the sun still beat down mercilessly, but in her mind's eye she was already gliding through palatial rooms, draped in silk, the mayoress-to-be. She imagined the envious glances of the very women she now passed, the simple folk who wouldn't recognize royalty even when it walked among them. She allowed herself a small, condescending smile, humming a tune from a forgotten opera. She was on her way to the Golden Moon Lodge for another rendezvous, another dose of the intoxicating validation Bradford so readily supplied. Her pleasant daydream shattered abruptly. A figure blocked her path, solid, unyielding, radiating an aura of simmering fury. It was Cassandra, one of Bradford's wives, the most outspoken one, Linda recalled with a flicker of annoyance. Cassandra wasn't smiling, her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes narrowed into slits. Well, well, Cassandra's voice was low, guttural. Husband snatcher. So this is the road you take every afternoon, swinging your hips on your way to see the chief. The title was spat out like poison. Linda instinctively straightened, her own arrogance rising to meet the challenge. Look who it is, she retorted, mimicking Cassandra's sneer. The local champion. Who invited you to speak to me? Step aside. Cassandra didn't budge. If anything, she stepped closer, invading Linda's personal space. Me, local? You think you're better? You who crawl out of the city's gutters to spread your legs for other women's husbands. You should hide your face in shame, not strut around like a prize hen. Linda gasped, outraged. How dare you? I used to wear diamonds that cost more than your entire miserable village. Do you even know the smell of real French perfume? Don't you dare try me, you ignorant woman. Cassandra let out a harsh laugh that grated on Linda's nerves. Diamonds, perfume, look at you now. A so-called billionaire's wife groveling at the feet of a poor imitation of a chief. Are you blind, woman? Or just stupid? That gold he flaunts, fake, bought from a trader in the next town over. Those connections he boasts about, lies. He owes money to half the village. You're following a man wrapped in glittering lies, hoping some of it will rub off on you. The words struck Linda with physical force, particularly the accusation about the gold. She remembered Bradford's chains, perhaps a bit too brassy. A sliver of doubt pierced her inflated confidence. You're lying, she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. You're just jealous because he chose me, because I'm younger, more beautiful. Jealous? Cassandra scoffed, of sharing a liar and a cheat. No, woman, I pity you. He's using you, just like he uses everyone. You opened your legs for empty promises. The insult, raw and public, snapped something inside Linda. Decorum forgotten, she lunged, grabbing at Cassandra's wrapper. Cassandra retaliated instantly, seizing Linda's scarf. Dust flew as the two women grappled furiously in the middle of the path, shouting curses, tearing at clothes and hair. Villagers stopped to watch, some gasping, others murmuring disapprovingly, a few openly laughing at the spectacle of the proud city woman brought low, fighting like a common fishwife. A young boy ran past yelling, "Come see! City woman fighting chief's wife." The humiliation burned Linda hotter than the afternoon sun. Finally wrenching herself free, her hair wild, her scarf torn, Linda spat one last venomous word. "Rubbish!" and stormed away, breathing heavily, her chest heaving with exertion and fury. She didn't slow down until she reached the relative sanctuary of the Golden Moon Lodge, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. Her carefully constructed composure was in tatters, replaced by a seething rage mixed with a terrifying growing suspicion. She burst through the lodge doors, barely acknowledging the startled look on Emily's face at the reception desk, and marched directly to the door of Bradford's usual room, pounding on it with her fist. Come in," Bradford's lazy voice drawled from within. Linda shoved the door open and stormed inside. Bradford was lounging on the worn settee, picking at a plate of leftover roasted meat, looking surprised by her abrupt, disheveled entrance. "What is the meaning of this?" Linda demanded, her voice shaking with fury, pointing back towards the village. "I was just attacked. By one of your wives, on the street, like some common animal." Bradford wiped his greasy fingers on his shorts, looking mildly annoyed. Attacked? Cassandra again? That troublesome woman. "She said things," Linda interrupted, pacing the small room like a caged tigress. "Vile things. She said your gold is fake, that you're just a poor chief living on borrowed time and empty words. Is it true, Bradford? Is it?" He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. "And you believed that jealous shrew?" "Answer me," Linda shouted, stepping closer. "I want the truth. Your wives are laughing at me behind my back, aren't they? This whole village thinks I'm a fool. Is your gold real or fake?" Bradford slowly got to his feet, his expression hardening. The lazy charm vanished, replaced by a cold arrogance. "Of course it's real, you foolish woman. What do you take me for?" "Lies," Linda scoffed, emboldened by anger and desperation. "You must think I'm an idiot. Perhaps I was blind before, dazzled by your act, because I was used to real wealth, real diamonds. My husband, my real husband, before his troubles, had toilets with gold-plated handles. Our kitchen had marble floors imported from Italy. I know quality when I see it, and those trinkets you wear—" Bradford's face contorted in a sneer. "And yet," he interrupted, his voice dangerously soft, "you left all that supposed luxury to throw yourself at me, a simple village chief. If you truly came from such splendor, then you are the foolish one, aren't you?" Linda gasped, stunned by the sudden shift, the contempt in his eyes. What? What did you say?" "You heard me," Bradford suddenly roared, his voice echoing in the small room. Do you actually think I sought you out for your dazzling personality? Don't flatter yourself. If it wasn't for settling that old gambling debt that bankrupt fool Edward Grayson forced on me years ago, making me promise to keep an eye on his precious high-maintenance wife if she ever showed up here needing distraction. A woman like you wouldn't even register on my radar. You think you're special. You're just convenient. The words hit Linda like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Edward knew. Edward planned this. This humiliation, this affair. It was orchestrated. The ground seemed to dissolve beneath her feet. She wasn't just betrayed by Bradford, she was a pawn in her own husband's cruel game. The dual betrayal was suffocating, unbearable. So that's how you really see me, she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a chilling emptiness. Yes, Bradford shouted, clearly enjoying her devastation now. Cheap, easy. A woman whose loyalty shifts with the wind, abandoning her husband the moment the money runs out. You think I respect that? At least my wives, troublesome as they are, stayed with me when I had nothing. But you? You ran from one man's supposed poverty straight into the arms of another, too blinded by desperation to see the truth right in front of you. He gestured dismissively towards the door. Now get out of my room, and don't ever come back. Numbly, Linda turned and stumbled out of the room, out of the lodge, her face burning with a shame so profound it felt corrosive. She was vaguely aware of Emily averting her gaze at the reception desk. Outside, the village seemed different, hostile. The whispers of the passers-by felt louder now, pointed, laced with mockery. See the city woman, someone snickered. Thought she was too good for us. Now look at her, thrown out like trash, another added. She hurried her steps, desperate to escape the condemning eyes, the suffocating judgment. Her grand dreams of becoming mayoress, of regaining her status, lay shattered in the dust around her feet, replaced by the bitter ashes of deceit and profound humiliation. She finally reached the edge of the compound, the hovel looming before her like a final, inescapable prison. She reached the hovel's edge, the dilapidated structure looking more like a cage than ever before. The flimsy dreams of palaces and power had evaporated like morning mist, leaving only the acrid taste of dust, deceit, and utter humiliation. Inside, her husband waited, the architect of at least part of her ruin, and Linda, stripped bare of her illusions and dignity, had nowhere left to turn, nowhere left to hide. Stripped bare of her illusions, coated in the dust of public humiliation and the acid rain of private betrayal, Linda faced the final imposing figure in the wreckage of her life. The hovel, once merely a symbol of fallen fortunes, now felt like the stage for a final brutal reckoning. Linda stumbled the last few yards to the hovel, her body trembling not just from the aftermath of the fight and confrontation, but from a deeper, soul-shaking realization. The torn scarf fluttered uselessly at her neck. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes burning with a volatile mixture of rage, shame, and utter desolation. The carefully constructed fantasy of escape, of regaining power and status through Mr. Bradford, had imploded, leaving behind only the bitter taste of ashes and the horrifying knowledge of her own gullibility, and her husband's calculated cruelty. She shoved the flimsy door open and practically fell inside, halting abruptly as she saw him. Edward was sitting at the rickety wooden table, not working on a repair, but simply sitting, waiting. He hadn't needed to witness her return. The waves of her humiliation seemed to precede her, filling the small, oppressive space. Lucas was nowhere to be seen, perhaps having sensed the impending detonation and wisely retreated to the dubious sanctuary of the yard. Edward looked up slowly as she entered. His face was unreadable, carved from stone, but his eyes held a deep, weary sorrow that was almost worse than anger. He didn't speak, merely watched her, taking in her disheveled state, the raw despair etched onto her features. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Linda stood there, breathing heavily, the fight-or-flight instinct warring within her. Shame battled fury. Then the fury won. "You," she finally choked out, the word thick with venom. She took a shaky step towards him. "You knew, didn't you?" Edward didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady. "Knew what, Linda?" "Don't play games with me, Edward," she shrieked, abandoning all pretense of control. "Bradford, that slimy, lying cheat. He told me about the debt. You set me up." The accusation hung in the air, vibrating with disbelief and rage. "You knew he owed you money. You used him. You deliberately threw me to that wolf just to watch me squirm, just to prove your sick point." She advanced further, leaning over the table, her face close to his. "Was this all part of your twisted little test? Humiliating me? Watching me grasp at straws while you sat back, secretly pulling the strings? What kind of monster are you?" Edward met her furious gaze, a flicker of something unreadable: regret, pain, satisfaction, crossing his features before settling back into weary resolve. "Bradford owed me money, yes," he admitted quietly, his voice devoid of inflection. "That's a fact from long before any of this. Did I anticipate he might approach you, given the circumstances and his character? Perhaps. Did I specifically instruct him to seduce you? No. But I confess," his voice hardened slightly, "I wasn't entirely surprised by the path you chose, Linda. Or how quickly you chose it." "How dare you?" Linda spat, recoiling as if burned. "You sit there judging me, after you orchestrated this entire nightmare. After you threw us into this filth." Her voice cracked. "Do you have any idea at all what it feels like, to lose everything overnight? To go from silk sheets to this hovel crawling with God knows what? To have people snickering behind your back? To feel so utterly desperate you'd cling to any hope, even a false one?" Tears streamed down her face now, tears of rage and genuine anguish. "You think I'm just greedy, don't you? You think it's all about the money?" She laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You have no idea. You who always had a safety net, who built fortunes like other men build fences. My father, he lost everything, overnight. Just like you pretended to. I saw what it did to him, to my mother. The shame, the fear, the constant scraping by. I swore, Edward, I swore I would never ever let that happen to me or my children. I would do anything to avoid that kind of poverty again." It was the closest she had ever come to revealing a vulnerability, a hint of the fear that might underpin her relentless pursuit of security. For a moment, Edward seemed taken aback, a flicker of understanding softening his eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the grim reality of her present actions. "And anything," he echoed softly, the words like ice, "included betraying your marriage vows, abandoning any shred of loyalty to the man you promised to stand by, for better or for worse, the moment things got difficult. Clinging to a known liar like Bradford because he flashed some fake gold and whispered empty promises." He leaned forward slightly. "Your fear of poverty might be real, Linda. But you didn't cling to hope. You clung to deceit. You chose the easiest, most dishonorable path available. You weren't looking for security, you were looking for a shortcut back to luxury, and you didn't care who you hurt or what lines you crossed to get it." His words were quiet, but they landed like blows. Linda flinched, momentarily silenced. He saw not just her fear, but the choices she had made. Despite that fear, I needed to feel like myself again," she cried, defensive now. "Not like this broken, impoverished creature you turned me into." "I didn't turn you into anything, Linda," Edward countered, his voice firm but weary. "I merely removed the gilded bars of the cage. It was you who chose how to react when faced with freedom, with adversity. You chose betrayal. You chose illusion over reality. Just as Chloe chose cruelty and selfishness." He sighed, a deep, ragged sound. "This test, it wasn't just about money, it was about character. About what lies beneath the surface when the pressure is on. And the truth is uglier than I could have imagined." He stood up from the table, the movement slow, deliberate. He looked at her, truly looked at her, at the ruined makeup, the torn scarf, the desperate anger in her eyes that couldn't quite mask the crushing humiliation beneath. There was nothing left between them but the wreckage. No respect, no trust, not even the comfortable indifference of their past life. Only bitterness and the ghosts of what might have been. "I am ashamed, Linda," he said finally, the words heavy with finality, echoing his earlier sentiment, but carrying a far greater weight now. "Not just of your actions, but ashamed that our life together, the wealth I provided, somehow fostered this hollowness. Ashamed that I didn't see it sooner." He didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to argue. The reckoning was complete. He turned and walked towards the door, needing air, needing distance, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of their shared failure. The bitter words hung in the stagnant air of the hovel, echoing the final, irreparable shattering of their marriage. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage, only the chilling silence between two strangers trapped together in the ruins of a life built on faulty foundations. With all illusions stripped away, what future could possibly rise from such desolate ashes for any of them? The bitter words of the final argument hung heavy in the air, settling like toxic dust over the ruins of their marriage. In that desolate silence, beyond anger and humiliation, a quiet, unshakable decision finally took root. Not an escape, but an extraction. Night fell over the hovel, bringing no relief from the oppressive weight of the day's confrontations. Edward sat on the rickety porch step, staring out into the darkness, where the overgrown yard dissolved into impenetrable shadows. The earlier rage had subsided, leaving behind a profound emptiness, a chilling clarity. Linda's accusations, her raw fear laced with venom, echoed in his mind, intertwined with the crushing disappointment of Chloe's callous defiance and the sickening revelation of his own calculated manipulation involving Bradford. He had set out to test their love, their loyalty. The results were stark and irrefutable. Linda and Chloe had failed spectacularly, choosing illusion, betrayal, and self-interest at every turn. But had he truly won? Seeing the depths of their moral decay, witnessing the ugliness unleashed by hardship, it felt less like validation and more like staring into an abyss he had helped create. His gaze drifted towards the dim lamplight spilling from the hovel's single window, where Lucas sat hunched over his worn book, seeking refuge in its pages. That was the crux of it. Lucas. His quiet, resilient son, who had weathered this storm with unwavering loyalty and quiet dignity, despite the emotional shrapnel flying around him. This toxic environment, saturated with resentment, deceit, and shattered hopes, was no place for him. The test was over, its purpose served, however painfully. Now it was time to rescue his son from the wreckage. It was no longer just about proving a point. It was about preserving the one pure, untarnished relationship he had left. The decision settled, firm and irrevocable. They had to leave. The next morning, the air in the hovel was thick with a different kind of tension. Not the explosive anger of yesterday, but the brittle silence of fractured connections. Linda and Chloe moved around pointedly, avoiding Edward's gaze, occasionally exchanging whispered remarks and contemptuous glances in his direction. They were clearly nursing their grievances, clinging to their narrative of victimhood. Edward waited until they were both seated outside, listlessly picking at a meager breakfast of cold cassava. He approached them, his face calm, his voice neutral, betraying none of the internal resolve. "I've made arrangements," he stated simply, looking somewhere past them. "I found a job in the city, security work." He let the humble occupation hang in the air. "It's not much, naturally, but it's a start, a way to provide something." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "Lucas and I will be leaving tomorrow morning." The reaction was instantaneous, almost comical in its predictability if it hadn't been so tragic. First, a stunned silence, then twin bursts of incredulous, scornful laughter. "Security work," Linda shrieked, slapping her thigh, her earlier humiliation seemingly forgotten in this moment of perceived vindication. "Oh, Edward, you never cease to amaze. At your age, reduced to being a night watchman, you truly are finished, absolutely, irrevocably finished." She laughed again, a harsh, grating sound. "And I suppose you expect me to pack my non-existent bags and follow you?" to be introduced as Mrs. Security Guard, to live in some cramped little room somewhere, smelling of desperation. Don't make me laugh. Her relief was palpable, radiant. His departure wasn't a loss, it was an unburdening. Chloe quickly joined in, her voice dripping with malice. Seriously, Dad, a security guard? Wow, that's actually pathetic. She smirked, tossing her hair. Well, good riddance. Maybe Mum and I can finally have some peace and quiet around here without your constant sighing and long face bringing us down. Go play guard dog in the city. She exchanged a triumphant look with Linda. They were free of his failure, free of his judgment, free to pursue their own misguided paths to salvation. Edward absorbed their derision without comment. Their reaction was exactly what he expected, another layer of confirmation. I didn't ask you to follow, he repeated quietly, his voice flat, detached. You've both made your choices very clear. Stay here, by all means. There was no plea, no hint of regret in his tone, only the cold finality of separation. He turned and went inside to find Lucas already packing his single duffel bag, his movements methodical, efficient. The boy's face was unreadable, a mixture of emotions warring beneath the surface, perhaps relief at escaping the oppressive atmosphere, sadness at the finality of the family's disintegration, but overlaid with a quiet determination. He looked up as Edward entered. Are you ready, son? Edward asked softly. Lucas nodded, zipping the bag shut. Yes, Dad. He didn't ask questions about the security job. He didn't need to. His trust in his father, despite everything, remained absolute. He slung the bag over his shoulder. He glanced briefly towards the doorway, where his mother and sister's mocking laughter could still be heard, a brief shadow crossing his face before he straightened his shoulders. They left early the next morning, just as the sun began to burn off the cool night air. They didn't use the old sedan. Edward had instructed James to arrange for discreet transport to pick them up at the edge of the village, avoiding any further spectacle. As they walked down the dusty track leading away from the hovel, they could hear Linda and Chloe's voices carrying on the morning air. Finally, the house will be peaceful, Linda called out, her voice laced with exaggerated cheer. Good riddance to bad rubbish, Chloe added, followed by another burst of laughter. Let them go be poor together in the city. This village is ours now. Edward kept walking, his gaze fixed straight ahead, not dignifying their parting shots with even a backward glance. Lucas walked steadily beside him. For a fleeting second, the boy hesitated, turning his head slightly, taking one last look at the crumbling house, at the two figures standing near the doorway, silhouetted against the rising sun. What he saw, or what he felt in that moment, remained hidden behind his stoic expression. Then he turned resolutely away, matching his father's stride, walking towards the waiting car, towards the city, towards an unknown future. The sound of their mother and sister's scornful laughter finally faded behind them, swallowed by the distance and the quiet sounds of the awakening village. Father and son walked away, leaving the wreckage of their family and its tangled web of deceit behind. Ahead lay the city, holding the promise of a humble security job for one, and an astonishing, life-altering truth for the other. The final act of Edward's gambit was about to unfold. The rumble of the village track yielded to the smooth asphalt of the highway, carrying them further from the wreckage of their family and towards the city's hazy, indifferent skyline. Lucas stared out, wondering what life awaited them now, tethered to a father seemingly broken and a future allegedly built on the humble promise of a security job. The journey back to the city unfolded in a silence vastly different from the Yuan-Hen-filled trip weeks prior. The aging sedan, arranged by the ever-discreet James Carter, hummed along the highway, eating up the miles that separated them from Willow Creek. Lucas, seated beside his father this time, watched the landscape transform in reverse, from rustic hills and struggling farms back to manicured suburbs and the familiar sprawl of urban life. He felt a confusing mix of relief to be leaving the oppressive atmosphere of the hovel and a dull ache for the irretrievable fracture of his family. He occasionally glanced at Edward, whose profile was calm, almost serene, hands steady on the wheel, He looked less like a man heading towards a low-paying security job and more like, well, Lucas wasn't sure. The quiet confidence that had always defined his father seemed to be subtly resurfacing, replacing the weary resignation of the past weeks. Lucas had expected they'd head towards the industrial outskirts or perhaps a modest downtown apartment building. He braced himself for shared accommodation, bunk beds maybe, a life drastically different but hopefully less emotionally fraught than the one they'd just escaped. But the driver, following unheard instructions, bypassed the city center, navigating instead through increasingly affluent neighborhoods. Lush lawns, imposing gates, and the quiet hum of expensive vehicles replaced the grit and noise Lucas had anticipated. Confusion began to cloud Lucas's relief. "Dad," he ventured hesitantly, this doesn't look like the area for security postings." Edward offered a small, enigmatic smile, but didn't reply immediately. The car slowed, turning into an exclusive tree-lined enclave guarded by a formidable stone gatehouse. The guard waved them through without hesitation. Lucas's bewilderment intensified as they proceeded down a winding private road, passing properties that rivaled, and in some cases surpassed, the grandeur of their previous mansion. Finally, the car pulled to a smooth stop before a breathtakingly modern structure of glass, steel, and warm wood, nestled amidst impeccably landscaped gardens. A tiered fountain splashed musically near the entrance, and through the panoramic windows, Lucas could glimpse minimalist sculptures and vast, light-filled spaces. It wasn't just luxurious, it was a statement. "Dad, where are we?" Lucas breathed, staring, utterly perplexed. "Whose house is this? Does your boss live here?" Edward switched off the ignition, the sudden silence amplifying the burble of the fountain. He turned to Lucas, his eyes holding a depth of emotion Lucas hadn't seen in weeks, a mixture of profound relief, lingering pain, and something else. Justification. "Lucas," he said softly, his voice clear and steady now, devoid of the earlier pretense. "There's no security job." Lucas stared at him, trying to process the words. No job. Then, what are we doing here?" Edward unbuckled his seatbelt. "Come with me." He got out, and Lucas numbly followed. Edward approached the massive, electronically controlled gates barring the driveway. He didn't knock or use an intercom. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek remote, and pressed a button. With a silent, hydraulic hiss, the imposing gates swung inward. Lucas felt dizzy, his mind struggling to reconcile the hovel, the hardship, the security job with the scene unfolding before him. Edward led him up the sweeping driveway, past a gleaming black Maserati and a vintage Aston Martin parked near the entrance. Cars Lucas recognized instantly as part of his father's collection, supposedly lost forever. They stepped into a soaring foyer, sunlight streaming through a 2-story glass wall onto a polished white marble floor. The air smelled faintly of lemon verbena and new beginnings. It was magnificent, austere, and utterly overwhelming. Edward finally stopped, turning fully to face his son amidst the echoing grandeur. The carefully constructed mask of the defeated man dissolved completely, revealing the familiar, formidable presence of Edward Grayson, the billionaire. "This, Lucas," Edward said, his voice resonating with emotion, "isn't where I work." He gestured around the stunning space. "This is our home now. Our new home." Lucas gaped, speechless. His mind reeled. Home, ours, but the bankruptcy, the village, losing everything. I don't understand. Edward placed a hand gently on Lucas's shoulder, his touch firm, grounding. "We never really lost everything, son, not financially." He sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of his confession. The bankruptcy, the move, the hardship. It was all a test, a terrible, necessary test. Lucas pulled back slightly, shaking his head, trying to absorb the enormity of the revelation. A test? All of it? The suffering, Mom's desperation, Chloe's actions. You let that happen? You watched it happen? The relief that had tentatively begun to bloom was instantly choked by a wave of confusing hurt and disbelief. "Yes," Edward admitted, his gaze unflinching, though laced with pain. "I had to, Lucas. I had to know the truth. For years I felt invisible. Like a provider, a bank account, but not a husband, not a father. Surrounded by wealth, yet utterly alone. I needed to know if the love, the loyalty, was tied to the fortune, or if anything genuine remained beneath it all. He recounted the hollowness he felt, the decision born of desperation, the instructions to James Carter. He spoke of the agony of watching Linda and Chloe prioritize possessions over people, comfort over character, their immediate descent into betrayal, confirming his deepest fears. But you, Lucas, Edward's voice softened, filled with fierce pride and gratitude. You stayed. Through the squalor, the hunger, the bitterness, you never wavered. You showed loyalty, resilience, and a strength of character that humbled me. You didn't complain. You endured. You didn't grasp for shortcuts. You offered support. You proved yourself to be the true Grayson heir, not just of my fortune, but of my values. The values I feared I had lost or failed to instill. Lucas listened, the pieces clicking into place. The suddenness of the ruin, his father's strange detachment at times, the presence of Mr. Bradford. Bradford, Lucas said aloud, the name tasting like ash. Mom meeting him. The whispers I heard. About a debt. Edward nodded grimly. Yes, that part was perhaps the most calculated. He explained, Bradford owed me a significant sum from a disastrous business deal years ago. A debt he conveniently forgot. Until I reminded him. When I decided on this test, I saw an opportunity. I didn't explicitly tell him to seduce your mother, Lucas, but I instructed him, as partial repayment, to keep an eye on her should she arrive in the village, to test her resolve if the opportunity arose. I knew his character. I knew he was opportunistic, unscrupulous. It was a gamble, using one devil to expose another. I needed to see how far Linda would go when temptation, wrapped in false promises, presented itself. He saw the conflict in Lucas's eyes. It was a morally grey area, son, perhaps even wrong. But I was desperate for the unvarnished truth, no matter how ugly. Lucas felt a wave of nausea. His mother manipulated, his father the manipulator, himself an unwitting participant in this cruel charade. So all that pain, Mom fighting with that woman, Chloe falling apart. You knew it might happen? You risked it? I risked revealing the truth that was already there, Lucas. Edward countered gently but firmly. Their choices were their own. The hardship merely stripped away the veneer that concealed their true characters. I didn't force Linda to seek out Bradford. I didn't force Chloe to betray trust for trinkets. He gripped Lucas's shoulder again. And I couldn't tell you. It would have compromised the entire test, put you in an unbearable position. You needed to act authentically, and you did. You were the only one. He gestured around the magnificent space again. I sold the old mansion. Too many ghosts, too many lies. I wanted a fresh start. For us. This house, this life. It's not just about wealth, Lucas. It's about building something real, something earned not just with money, but with integrity. Something you deserve. Lucas looked around the hall, vast and echoing, then back at his father, the powerful billionaire, the calculating strategist, the grieving husband, the proud parent, all warring within one man. Relief warred with a confusing, exhausting mix of hurt, anger, and a dawning, complex understanding. The truth was out, staggering and multifaceted, but its weight felt immense, almost crushing. The staggering revelation hung in the opulent air, thick with unspoken questions and the turbulent aftermath of unveiled truths. Father and son stood amidst the stark luxury, the chasm of the past weeks, bridged by a confession that was both a relief and a burden. The immediate storm had passed, but the landscape of their relationship had irrevocably changed. Now began the difficult task of navigating the wreckage and finding a way forward, together. The echoes of the staggering truth settled in the vast, opulent space, leaving not silence, but a palpable void filled with unspoken questions and the fragile beginnings of a conversation years, perhaps lifetimes, in the making. Where do a father and son even begin, after reality itself has been irrevocably rearranged. They moved as if by unspoken agreement from the imposing grandeur of the foyer into a slightly smaller, though no less luxurious study. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the sprawling city lights beginning to twinkle against the deepening twilight sky. Books lined one wall, real books, bound in leather, unlike the purely decorative volumes in their old mansion. A minimalist fireplace offered a focal point, though it remained unlit. The room felt expensive, yet personal, clearly curated by Edward himself. Lucas sank into a deep leather armchair, the supple material sighing beneath his weight, a sound so alien after weeks of hard plastic and rough wood. He felt drained, the adrenaline of the reveal ebbing away, leaving behind a confusing soup of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a profound sense of disorientation, a lingering hurt, and a deep, aching sadness for the tattered remnants of their family. Edward poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal carafe, handing one to Lucas before taking the seat opposite him. He didn't speak immediately, allowing his son the space to process. His gaze steady but softened now, the hard edge of the strategist momentarily receding. Finally, Lucas broke the silence, his voice quiet but steady. I think I understand why, Dad. Why you felt you had to do it. He looked up, meeting his father's eyes. The emptiness. I felt it too sometimes. The feeling that none of it mattered if it wasn't real. He took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. But living through it, believing we truly had nothing. Watching Chloe fall apart like that. His voice hitched slightly. That felt real. The fear, Dad. The constant grinding fear and humiliation. It was real for me. And seeing them, knowing you were just watching. The unspoken accusation hung in the air. Edward leaned forward, his expression somber. Lucas, I know. And believe me, watching you endure that, it was the hardest part of this entire ordeal. Seeing you carry the weight, stay strong while the others crumbled, it tore me apart. He paused, searching for the right words. I am truly, deeply sorry for the fear and the pain you had to endure. You didn't deserve any of it. It was the closest Edward Grayson had come to an apology in years, perhaps ever, and Lucas recognized the weight behind the words. But I couldn't tell you, Edward continued, his voice regaining some of its familiar firmness. The moment I did, the test would have been invalid. More importantly, it would have put you in an impossible position, forced to lie to your mother and sister, to carry my secret. That burden. It would have been worse, perhaps. I needed your actions, your loyalty, to be untainted, uncoerced. And they were. Magnificently so. Lucas nodded slowly, absorbing this. It made a harsh kind of sense. And Bradford? He asked, the name still feeling like grit in his mouth. Using his debt, letting him near Mom. Did you know he'd... Edward sighed, running a hand over his face. I knew Bradford was a desperate, opportunistic fool with questionable morals, deeply in debt to me. I calculated that given the chance, he would likely try to ingratiate himself, perhaps offer some form of assistance, hoping I might forgive his debt later. Did I specifically anticipate or desire seduction? No. But I knew Linda's vulnerability, her desperation for comfort and flattery. I put temptation in her path, yes. I wanted to see if any loyalty, any sense of propriety, remained when faced with such a blatant, albeit tarnished, offer of escape. He met Lucas's troubled gaze. It was a cold calculation, son, perhaps a cruel one. But the results, they simply confirmed what I already suspected about the foundations of our family life. But it wasn't just her choice then, was it? Lucas pressed quietly. You manipulated the situation. I exposed a pre-existing weakness, Lucas, Edward countered, though without heat. I didn't create it. The choices she made, the eagerness with which she embraced his lies, that was all her. He leaned back, looking out at the city lights. Perhaps I carry some blame from long before this test even began. Maybe I was too focused on building this. He gestured vaguely at their luxurious surroundings, and not enough on building was. Maybe I equated providing things with providing love or guidance. Maybe the emptiness I felt was partly a reflection of my own failures as a husband, as a father. This admission, quiet and unexpected, hung in the air. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of self-awareness Lucas hadn't expected. They sat in silence for a while, the city sparkling below them. "What happens to them now?" Lucas finally asked, the question heavy with unspoken grief. "Mom and Chloe, are we just leaving them there? In that place?" Edward's expression became resolute again, though tinged with sadness. "Their choices have led them to where they are, Lucas. They rejected the chance to leave with us, believing their own delusions. They chose paths built on deceit and betrayal." He paused. "I won't see them starve naturally. James will arrange for some anonymous basic support, enough to prevent utter destitution, channeled through a local charity perhaps. But reconciliation, bringing them back into this life." He shook his head slowly. "Impossible. The trust is irrevocably broken. They need to face the consequences of their actions. Perhaps away from the allure of wealth, they might eventually find something truer within themselves. But that journey, it's one they have to take alone." Lucas felt a pang of loss, a final severing. It was harsh, but he couldn't deny the truth in his father's words. He had seen their choices firsthand. "Okay," he whispered, accepting the grim finality. He looked at his father, truly looked at him, seeing not just the billionaire or the strategist, but a man marked by his own complex plan, bearing his own scars. "Okay, Dad." He took a deep breath. "But no more games, no more tests like this. Please, just truth, even when it's hard." Edward met his son's earnest gaze and nodded solemnly. "No more games, Lucas, I promise. From here on, just truth between us." He stood up and walked to the window, gesturing for Lucas to join him. They stood side by side, looking out at the sprawling metropolis below. "This life," Edward said, his voice softer now, "it comes with immense privilege, yes, but also immense responsibility. I failed to teach that properly before. We will do better now. Together." He put an arm around Lucas's shoulders, a gesture of comfort and partnership that felt more real, more earned than any hug shared in their previous life. As dusk finally yielded to night, painting the city skyline in a million points of light, viewed from their new haven, a fragile, hard-won understanding had been forged between father and son. The path ahead was clear, intended to be built on painful honesty, but the ghosts of the choices made and the family members abandoned to their fate in the village shadows remained. Could distance and wealth truly erase the ties, however damaged, that once bound them all? Weeks bled into a monotonous rhythm of resentment and simmering despair within the hovel's confines. Linda and Chloe clung to the tattered threads of their phantom hopes, oblivious to the echo of their discarded life-gathering force in the distant city, an echo about to reach them with the undeniable shattering roar of truth. Life in the village, stripped of its initial horrifying novelty, had settled into a dreary, resentful routine for Linda and Chloe. The brief, intoxicating excitement of their secret liaisons had begun to curdle. Linda hadn't heard from the increasingly elusive town mayor she'd pinned her latest hopes on after Bradford's humiliation, and Chloe's attempts to manipulate Mr. Collins towards the coveted necklace were proving frustratingly slow. They spent most days listlessly performing the bare minimum chores required for survival, their conversations often circling back to blaming Edward for their plight, or indulging in increasingly hollow fantasies about their glorious escape. The camaraderie forged in their initial shared contempt for Edward and Lucas had frayed, replaced by unspoken anxieties and the grating reality of their shared confinement. They were sitting outside the hovel one sluggish afternoon, swatting half-heartedly at flies, perhaps debating whose turn it was to fetch the heavy water bucket, when a familiar figure hurried up the dusty track towards them. It was Ryan, the village gossip, back from another trip to the city. But this time his usual eagerness was amplified, his eyes wide with the importance of his news. He clutched a folded newspaper tightly in his hand, like a trophy. "Madam Linda, Sister Chloe," he called out breathlessly as he approached, skidding to a halt before them. "You won't believe—" "Well, maybe you will now. I told you about Mr. Grayson." Linda sighed dramatically, not bothering to look up. "Ryan, if this is another one of your tall tales about my husband suddenly striking it rich—" "It's not a tale," Ryan interrupted, his voice high with excitement and vindication. He unfolded the newspaper with a flourish, revealing a large, clear photograph on the front page of the local business section. "Look, just look." Linda and Chloe reluctantly leaned forward. The photograph showed Edward Grayson, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, smiling confidently, shaking hands with the actual well-known city mayor at a high-profile charity gala. He didn't look like a broken man, nor did he resemble a humble security guard. He looked exactly like the powerful, influential billionaire they remembered, perhaps even more vital, more assured. The headline screamed, "Philanthropic Titan Edward Grayson pledges record donation at City Foundation Gala." A stunned silence fell. Linda snatched the paper from Ryan's hand, her eyes scanning the photo, then the text, her knuckles white. Chloe peered over her shoulder, her mouth slightly agape. "See," Ryan pressed, unable to contain his triumph. "Charity gala, record donation, billionaire philanthropist, not a security guard, eh? I saw him there myself, from a distance, of course, looking like he owned the whole city." Linda's first instinct, born of deep-seated pride and the sheer impossibility of admitting her catastrophic error in judgment, was denial. This must be an old photograph, Ryan," she stammered, her voice lacking its usual conviction. "Recycled news. You know how these papers are." "Old?" Ryan scoffed, tapping the date clearly printed at the top of the page. "It's from 2 days ago. Read the article. It talks about his recent return to the public eye, his plans for new investments, the Grayson Foundation's latest initiatives." Chloe grabbed the paper, her eyes devouring the text. The article detailed Edward's significant philanthropic work, mentioned his son Lucas accompanying him to the event, and referred to Edward's brief sabbatical, from which he had returned re-energized. There was no mention of bankruptcy, no hint of failure, only power, influence, and immense wealth deployed with practiced ease. It says Grayson Foundation," Chloe whispered, the words catching in her throat. He kept the foundation?" Maybe it's a trick," Linda suggested weakly, desperately searching for an alternative explanation. "Maybe his boss lent him the suit, let him attend the gala for appearances. Maybe the donation was exaggerated." The excuses sounded flimsy, even to her own ears. Ryan shook his head vehemently. "No, madame. Everyone in the city is talking about it. Grayson is back, bigger than ever. They say he quietly restructured, sold off some assets like that old mansion, but his core fortune is intact, maybe even larger. People were wondering where he'd been, and now he's back on top." The foundation, the gala, the city mayor, Lucas by his side, the confident smile in the photograph, the sheer scale of the donation mentioned. Each detail was another hammer blow, shattering the flimsy walls of their denial. Linda sank back onto the plastic chair, the newspaper falling from her numb fingers onto the dusty ground. The image of Edward, powerful and smiling, mocked her from the page. All their scorn, their mockery, their confident predictions of his permanent failure echoed back at them now with deafening irony. Their laughter as he and Lucas walked away felt like shards of glass in her memory. Chloe stared blankly at the hovel, then at her own worn hands, then back at the newspaper photo. The calculated plans involving Mr. Collins, the desperate hopes pinned on trinkets and deceit, suddenly seemed pathetically, tragically foolish. They hadn't been resourceful survivors navigating a storm. They had been fools dancing on the deck of a sinking ship they themselves had helped scuttle, while the real lifeboat sailed away without them. The realization washed over them, cold and sickening. They hadn't been abandoned by a failure they were better off without. They had actively scorned, ridiculed and driven away a man who held the keys to the very kingdom they craved, all while chasing after counterfeit crowns offered by village charlatans. They had traded a flawed diamond for shards of worthless glass. The enormity of their miscalculation, the sheer irreversible stupidity of their choices, began to crash down upon them with terrifying weight. Ryan stood awkwardly for a moment, seeing the devastation dawn on their faces, then quietly backed away, his point emphatically, brutally made. The discarded newspaper lay on the dusty ground, Edward's smiling, prosperous face a stark indictment of their choices. Denial finally crumbled, leaving Linda and Chloe staring blankly at each other, the horrifying truth echoing in the sudden crushing silence of the hovel. They hadn't been abandoned by a failure. They had cast out a king and crowned themselves queens of ashes. What terrible price, beyond the loss of wealth, would they now pay for such monumental self-inflicted folly? The silence that followed Ryan's departure wasn't empty, but pregnant with the deafening roar of undeniable truth. As the last flimsy ramparts of denial crumbled, the bitter harvest of their choices began, ripening with swift and merciless finality. The newspaper lay on the dirt floor between them, Edward's confident, smiling face a cruel mockery of their situation. The air in the hovel, usually thick with complaints or conspiratorial whispers, was now heavy with a suffocating silence, broken only by the frantic buzzing of a trapped fly against the grimy window pane. Linda sat rigidly on the plastic chair, staring blankly at the opposite wall, her face a mask of stunned horror. Chloe had sunk to the floor, knees drawn to her chest, rocking slightly back and forth, her earlier bravado completely extinguished. The truth, delivered so bluntly by Ryan and confirmed by the stark black and white of the newsprint, was too big, too catastrophic to fully grasp immediately. Edward wasn't a failure. He was richer, more powerful than ever. Lucas wasn't a fool blindly following his father. He was the chosen heir, now living a life of renewed splendor. And they were the fools. They who had laughed, scorned, betrayed, and plotted, had done so based on a lie they desperately wanted to believe. They had thrown away a kingdom for the hollow promises of village charlatans. For Linda, the realization was a double-edged sword. Not only had she lost the chance to return to her former life, but the humiliation inflicted by Bradford now carried the added sting of knowing Edward had, in some calculated way, allowed it, perhaps even facilitated it via the debt. She felt stripped bare, exposed not just as greedy, but as utterly predictable, easily manipulated by both the fake chief and the husband she had underestimated. Her fantasy of becoming mayoress, a pathetic grasp for relevance after Bradford's dismissal, now seemed ludicrously naive. Who would want her now, the disgraced wife, the village laughingstock? Chloe, meanwhile, felt a different kind of panic clawing at her. The shock of her father's true status warred with the immediate pressing need for escape. Her plan involving Mr. Collins and the necklace suddenly felt urgent. No longer just a path to comfort, but her only conceivable way out of this nightmare. Clinging to this last shred of desperate hope, she composed herself, wiped the stunned tears from her face, and decided to act now. She had to secure that necklace before Collins somehow heard about her father and changed his tune, or before his wife made more trouble. Later that day, fueled by a desperate energy, Chloe slipped away towards Collins's shop. She found him locking up for the evening. "Mr. Collins," she began, forcing a seductive smile, ready to enact the next stage of her plan, perhaps suggesting a private meeting where she could finally admire the necklace up close. But Collins didn't return the smile. His expression was cool, guarded. "Ah, Chloe, just closing up." "I was hoping we could talk," she ventured, trying to gauge his mood. He sighed, avoiding her eyes. "Look, Chloe, about us. Things have gotten complicated. My wife, she knows. She found out everything." He shook his head. "It's too risky. We can't see each other anymore. It's over." Chloe felt a cold dread seep into her veins, but her immediate thought was the necklace. "Over? But you promised. You said you might leave her. And the necklace. You said I could see it." Collins finally looked at her, and there was no warmth in his eyes, only a shrewd, dismissive glint. "The necklace?" He gave a short, unpleasant laugh. "Oh, that old thing. Funny story. Turns out it wasn't worth nearly as much as my wife thought. Sold it last week to a traveling merchant for a pittance. Needed the cash, you know." He patted his pocket. "As for leaving my wife, why would I do that? Especially for a girl who clearly only cared about what little money I flashed around." He saw the devastated shock on Chloe's face, and his expression hardened further. "You thought you were playing me, didn't you, city girl? Well, looks like the game is up." He finished locking the door, turning his back on her without another word, leaving her standing alone in the dusty lane as dusk gathered. The lie about selling the necklace was transparently cruel, likely told to cover his tracks or simply to twist the knife. Chloe knew with sickening certainty that he had likely secured the real necklace himself, perhaps using information she had inadvertently given him in her attempts to scope out his security. He hadn't just abandoned her, he had likely robbed her of her final desperate hope. She had been outplayed, used and discarded by the very man she thought she was manipulating. The irony was crushing. Stumbling back towards the hovel, the last flicker of fight drained out of her, leaving only emptiness. Linda's public standing deteriorated just as quickly. Her fight with Cassandra had already made her notorious, but now, coupled with the news of Edward's wealth, which Ryan, feeling vindicated, made sure everyone knew, the narrative shifted. She wasn't just a homewrecker, she was a foolish homewrecker who had thrown away a fortune for nothing. Mr. Bradford, eager to distance himself and deflect blame, actively fueled the fire, painting Linda as a desperate, calculating woman who had pursued him relentlessly. Villagers who had once offered tentative smiles now averted their gazes or whispered openly as she passed. Shopkeepers suddenly seemed hesitant to serve her, prices mysteriously inflated. The anonymous support Edward had likely arranged hadn't kicked in yet, or was perhaps deliberately minimal, and their meager funds dwindled rapidly. Days turned into a blur of quiet desperation. The arguments between mother and daughter ceased, replaced by a heavy, resentful silence. There was nothing left to fight about, no energy left for blame. They were trapped together in their shared failure. Hunger became a more frequent visitor, gnawing at their insides, a constant reminder of their folly. The hovel felt smaller, darker, colder, its damp walls closing in. One evening, as a cold rain began to leak through a new crack in the roof, dripping relentlessly into a bucket placed on the floor, Linda and Chloe sat huddled together on the lumpy mattress, wrapped in thin blankets. The last embers of the cooking fire had died hours ago. Outside, the village was dark and silent. Inside, the only sound was the steady plink, plink, plink of water hitting the bottom of the bucket. Linda stared at the rhythmic dripping, her eyes vacant. The image of Edward's face in the newspaper, confident and prosperous, swam before her eyes, juxtaposed with the memory of her own mocking laughter as he'd walked away. She thought of the silk sheets, the warm baths, the effortless comfort she had traded for this. For shame, for hunger, for the contempt of peasants, and the cold reality of a leaking roof. Chloe, beside her, let out a dry, rasping sob. The stolen necklace, her ticket out, had been an illusion, just like everything else. Mr. Collins was gone. Her online life was a distant memory. Her beauty, her only currency here, was fading under the harsh conditions. She was trapped, utterly and completely. The full weight of their choices, their arrogance, their monumental self-inflicted ruin finally crashed down upon them with suffocating force. There were no more schemes, no more fantasies, no more blame to deflect. There was only the cold, damp hovel, the leaky roof, the gnawing hunger, and the vast, empty expanse of a future they had forfeited through their own blindness and greed. They had scorned a king and crowned themselves queens of ashes, and now they were left to reign over their desolate, self-made kingdom of regret. The rain drummed a somber dirge on the leaky roof, mirroring the hollow beat of regret in two shattered hearts. Trapped in the squalor they had chosen, shunned by the world they had scorned, Linda and Chloe faced the bleak, unyielding consequences of their choices. Miles away, a new life began for a father and son, built on painful truths, while back in the village, the ashes of delusion offered no warmth, only the chilling, enduring legacy of what might have been. The dramatic saga of the Grayson family offers profound insights into the human condition, urging us to look beyond the glittering facade of wealth and status. It starkly illustrates that true value lies not in material possessions, but in the bedrock of loyalty, genuine love, and unwavering character, qualities embodied so clearly by Lucas amidst the turmoil. His steadfastness stands in sharp contrast to the paths chosen by Linda and Chloe, whose stories serve as cautionary tales about the destructive power of greed and delusion. Their desperate chase for lost luxury, fueled by illusion and leading to betrayal, ultimately resulted in their devastating downfall, proving that shortcuts built on deceit inevitably lead to ruin. This narrative powerfully demonstrates how adversity acts as a crucible, stripping away pretense and revealing the core nature of individuals. While hardship forged resilience and deepened the bond between Edward and Lucas, it exposed the selfishness and moral fragility of Linda and Chloe, accelerating their descent. Their tragic end underscores the heavy weight of our choices. Every decision, especially those made under pressure or driven by base desires, shapes our destiny and carries inescapable consequences. The story reminds us that true connection, the kind Edward desperately sought and eventually began rebuilding with Lucas, is the most valuable asset, something easily fractured by materialism and deceit. So what can we take away to enrich our own lives? First, actively cherish and invest in your relationships, the family and friends who value you for who you are, not what you have. Live authentically, rejecting the allure of false appearances and dishonest gains. When faced with hardship, strive to meet it with integrity and resilience, like Lucas, rather than seeking compromised escapes. Take responsibility for your choices and understand their ripple effects. Seek happiness, not in fleeting material pleasures, but in sustainable values like kindness, gratitude, and meaningful connections. Remember to appreciate what you possess, especially the intangible gifts of love and loyalty, for they are the true treasures easily lost when blinded by the pursuit of more. What lessons resonated most powerfully with you from the Grayson family's story? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If this story touched you or made you think, please give this video a like and share it with others who might find it meaningful. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out on more compelling stories and insightful discussions. Thank you for watching.